Good morning. This is a sample, I guess basically an audition of what my story is about. In August of 2020, I was diagnosed with COVID 19, and although I didn't think it was that big of a deal, I ended up in the hospital with bilateral pneumonia, a pulse oxygen level of 74 and dropping, 104 fever, a collapsing lung, coughing, just very high fever. And as I was admitted immediately and taken to the ICU and was told, my wife was told she had to wait in the parking lot, and I was told that I was very sick and most likely I would have to be sedated and intubated. Later that evening or early the next morning, I experienced 100% respiratory failure. I was actually bagged for about 5 minutes, and my heart stopped for about 5 seconds, and then it restarted itself. I ended up spending 17 days on that ventilator. During that time, I heard people speaking to me, telling to me to fight, to keep going, to fight as hard as I could. I heard people praying. I just assumed these were healthcare workers or doctors. I heard of people crying. One of the nurses that was in charge of my care later told me that she was one of them that was crying, and I actually heard one singing, and I later found out who that was as well. Like I said, I was intubated for 17 days. When they started to wake me up, I really had a lot of trouble. I wasn't supposed to survive that first weekend. They had actually called my wife and told her that most likely I wouldn't survive the night, much less that weekend. But I did. I'm totally convinced that it's through the mercy of God and the amazing care that I received at Hannibal Regional Hospital that I'm able to tell my story to others. I'm alive because of them. It was touch and go that weekend. A friend of mine had said that death was not only knocking on my door, but I had actually opened it up. But God slammed it shut, and that's not where the story ends, but that's just where it begins. As I said, I was having a lot of trouble waking up, and they had told my wife up and down several times that I might not make it that day, I might not make it this day, my fever would rise. I had several different infections, a lot of pain. I was on a lot of medication, sedation and morphine and fentanyl and a lot of steroids. They were basically trying everything to keep me alive, which they did. As I woke up, I would have problems because my blood pressure would spike, my pulse would spike. My body, I guess, had gotten used to being asleep and just didn't want to wake up. But finally, I started recognizing things. I didn't know where I was at. I didn't know what was going on. I had these dreams while I was sedated, and I'm not sure if those were dreams or actually waking up at times. I do remember one time my family standing outside my window, because this was during the time that you were not allowed to have any visitors. And so I do remember them out there, but I was on a ventilator and I couldn't speak. I tried to wave, but from the steroids and everything, I was actually pretty much paralyzed, 100% myopathy. Once I woke up, I did realize that I couldn't move anything, and I was laying on my back, and I'm not one that likes to lay on their back. But that was the only position I could be in. I couldn't reach for water. I couldn't go to the bathroom. Everything was being done for me. I was completely paralyzed. I couldn't even talk at first, but once they took everything out and I still had a feeding tube in, I ended up losing 65 pounds through that 5 week period. Uh, it was pretty severe weight loss for that short a time, and I didn't gain it back for at least another year. But I spent 5 weeks in ICU. Finally got to where I started realizing what was going on. They got my wife on the phone, and I was so out of it, I didn't even realize I was married or had children, although I would dream about them. But nothing really made sense to me. I guess that was just because of the drugs that I was on. When the doctors finally came in and said, "Listen, you don't have COVID anymore, but uh, we we took you as close to death as we could to save you, and so we've got to get you through rehab and back to moving." And I was just like, I just want to go home. But after 5 weeks in ICU, I finally was transferred to the inpatient rehab department. The insurance company had tried to send me to a acute rehab facility in a nursing home, and one of the rehab um, leadership supervisors said, no, 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 even though he's 63, he's a young 63, and he's in great shape, and he'll be able to handle the 3 hours of therapy that we require. And we've never done someone this far paralyzed or in myopathy, but we're convinced we can get him walking. Once they start talking to me in the rehab department, it was about, they actually had to lift me up in a thing they called the taco, which wrapped around me in a hoist and picked me up and put me into the bed and back and forth between the bed and the wheelchair and wherever I would go for therapy that day. They told me there was going to be about 6 weeks, and I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to last another 6 weeks in here? But that night I really just cried, and I couldn't sleep, and I'd been asleep so long, and I didn't know. I got to talk to my wife on the phone and understood where I was at and what was going on, and she was like, everything's okay, just concentrate on getting better. And my son had moved back home to take care of her, but I just couldn't imagine that I was going to be there another 6 weeks. But in the next morning, when they first started the therapy, the first thing was just to get me dressed and give me a bath. And that took over an hour. They kept trying to get me to sit up on the bed, and as soon as they let go of me, I'd start to fall over. I had no balance. I had no strength. I couldn't even push the call button. They had to especially design a rubber call button that they just put in my hand, and all I had to do was slightly squeeze it, and they would come. But a lot of times I would lose it if I fell asleep, and I couldn't get comfortable in the bed. Every part of my body just hurt so bad. But we kept going. And this is really the short version. But I ended up getting through therapy, and it was discharged on November 3rd of 2020 after 6 weeks in therapy. And I was actually told by the supervisor of therapy that I would walk out of there on November 3rd, and I was greeted with even though the rules of the hospital was you wheelchair out, I could walk on a walker by that time. It was almost 8 weeks before I even stood up, was able to stand up, and that was through a machine, which I have a video that goes through all that. But I went through the hospital, and they all cheered because I didn't know at the time, but I was the first person to survive COVID. After being in the hospital that long, no one had ever been in the hospital for 77 days. And they were cheering for me, even though I should have been the one cheering for them. And I walked out to all the people where I worked at and my family, and It took me a long time at home. Once I got home, I really couldn't do a whole lot because I didn't have the support of the nurses. But I would try. I said I was going to walk to the mailbox no matter what. I ended up having 3 months of outpatient therapy, and I kept walking back and forth to the mailbox, and I started just making a statement that I was going to run in the Hannibal Cannibal, which was a very strenuous race where you ended up running up Lover's Leap, which is about I don't know, it seems like a 45-degree incline for about a quarter mile, but it's tough. And I had done it once before when I was healthy, and I didn't know, but I said, hey, I just got to have something to shoot for. I started talking up at the hospital after I was invited back to do a one of the problems I have is COVID fog. I sometimes forget my attention what I'm talking about. It was the United Way, and they were having a fundraiser, and it was about who were your heroes, and they had called me up and said, "Hey, would you like to talk about your heroes with the hospital?" I said, "Oh yeah," and they said, "Well, we'll let you go too. We'll meet you at inpatient rehab." And I'm like, "Well, they didn't let me in. I kept trying to go up there at Christmas to visit them. They wouldn't let me in." They said, "Well, they're going to let us in to do this interview," and they've started letting people in. And so I did. Went up there, went to the interview, and it was very emotional. I got to see all the people that I knew. And they took me to a couple of rooms where they had told people about my story and met those people. And I got the idea. I said, well, why don't I start coming up here as a volunteer, and I'll just talk to these people and give them some encouragement. And like I said, they just started letting people back in. And so the CEO, who had become a friend of mine, said, yeah, let's do that. And I became a part of the ambassadors. I did that for about 5 weeks, and was starting to spend more time at the hospital than I was at my job. And my boss said, "Hey, I see the joy in you when you go to that hospital, but I don't see that joy at your job anymore." And I was a director of operations at a very successful financial planning firm, moving around a lot of money, providing research, dealing with patients, and I just felt nervous and scared about doing it. But I enjoyed being at the hospital and talking to the patients. And him and his wife took me to lunch and said, "Listen, we know the hospital's not going to try and poach you. They're too good of friends of ours, the CEOs and the president, and they know we're not going to offer you up because you're a part of our family, and you're always welcome here no matter what. You've got a job here for as long as you want it. But if you feel you're being led to go to that hospital, it's all right. You're not gonna hurt our feelings. We just want what's best for you, where God wants to lead you." So I asked to speak. I thought about it for a while, and I asked to speak with the CEO of the foundation. And Wendy and I had coffee, and she said, "Hey, we're going to reopen up a position called the Patient Experience Coordinator," and we had it open at one point during just before COVID, but the director of that retired, and we didn't open it back up. We didn't refill it because COVID came. And we'd like to get it going again. The thing is, you're just going to have to create the job, because if you're interested, because we just don't know what we needed to do, but we think what you're doing right now fulfills it, and just visiting with patients and telling them your story and finding out what we can do to help them. And after I thought about it a little bit, I said, yeah, let's do that. And so November 15th of 2021, I was hired as a patient experience coordinator. And what I do is visit with patients. I tell them my story. I try and give them encouragement, try and inspire them to keep fighting. We're a small 99-bed hospital, and most of our demographics are above 55 or 60. a lot of 80 to 90-year-old people, and just want someone to talk to and listen to them and give them some encouragement. And I primarily worked in the rehab, and then I started doing an ICU, and then doing it in all the departments. I've sat with families when their family members passed away. I just give them counseling. I recently was added as a assistant chaplain because I come into the hospital very early in the morning, usually about 5 o'clock, 5:30, and that way, if there's a code blue or anything, I can go to it and talk to that family. And the thing is, I want to give these patients the best experience. I know this hospital is not a hotel, but that doesn't mean we can't treat them with love and respect and just honor their wishes. So this is basically what I talk about. I can do it longer, I can do it shorter, but I wanted to send this to you as a interview to speak at your function or at your church, whichever you prefer. Thank you.